I had read it, Minority Report, previously, but of course, when we knew this was going to be adapted and filmed, then I became, more interested in exactly, what it was. And it was so obvious to me when I read it. I thought, of course, what a great premise, what a great story to tell, and what great questions it raises.
What is this that I'm seeing?
But of course, having Steven come aboard was like having lightning strike. I mean, it really was quite spectacular to have the marriage between my father's work and Steven Spielberg. 3 to 4, and being in the house with him. He didn't leave the house a lot because he was writing, and he spent a lot of time in solitary sort of confinement. I mean, he would go off and spend days and days writing, and so there would be times when I didn't see him much, but when he was with us, he was very warm and loving and affectionate, and I think that's what I remember most, is being in his arms and his big barrel chest, and just that sort of affection that a little girl remembers with her daddy.
Philip K. Dick was a bright, lonely child. His twin sister had died shortly after his birth in Chicago, Illinois, in 1928. And after his parents split up when he was 4, he wound up with his mother, and he became enthralled with the world of imagination. He began reading fantasy stories when he was young, so from there was an easy progression into science fiction in the 1940s when he was a teenager. Philip K. Dick had a long, hard road as an author. He wrote dozens and dozens of short stories in the early 1950s. Recognizing he was only being paid a penny a word, he decided to migrate to the somewhat more lucrative field of writing science fiction originals as novels, and he wrote dozens and dozens of novels over the next 30 years.
I think my first exposure to his works were on visits with him. He would verbally, tell me the story that he had written, and I would listen, and he would wait and ask and look to see whether I was understanding what the underlying theme was, and then he would compliment me if I understood it. I remember thinking at a certain point that I knew he thought that he was a writer, but I wasn't quite sure if he was an actual published writer, because, in my childhood and growing up, his books were not available. They were out of print. But, obviously, as I got older, I was very aware that, yes, he was published and had quite a following, and the following has grown, obviously, tremendously since his death in particular.
Just toward the end of his life, he finally began achieving some recognition. The film Blade Runner was about to come out. He was actually being published in hardcover on a regular basis. So he died knowing that he had made his mark in the field.
For him, science fiction was a way to use the trappings, the gadgets.
In fact, he was quoted as saying, "I'm not a novelist, I'm a fictional philosopher." And so that is very true. I think he considered himself much more of an explorer of theology and social sciences than a novelist.
Phil would get an idea, and he'd mull it over, and he began thinking, well, how can I extrapolate on this? How can I build on this? How can I make this unlike all the other stories that have been done on time travel? The magazine in which the Minority Report was first published in January of 1956.
Precogs don't see what you intend to do, only what you will do.
Obviously, he was very prescient. Everyday people, they're people you can relate to. And so I think that is what makes it universal and very accessible.
People trust you, John, when you speak of your absolute belief in Precrime. They know it's a belief born of pain, not politics. I always understood that.
If you go back and read the short story, there's this sort of dense inner skeleton that the film much more richly drapes with a full fleshy body. So in a way, it was possible to grow something much more organic around this very spare original story, and I thought that was a great opportunity.
The screenwriters of the film did a really marvelous job. Phil himself would do later on in his fiction, where he would humanize his precogs and mutants and stuff that he wrote after the early 1950s.
Well, I think that the thing about him that's so interesting as an author is that he's highly political. You know, he's using the genre to comment on today's society, and I think Steven embraced that. I mean, I think it's very much comments on today's society, and I think he did that very cleverly.
Sometimes, in order to see the light, you have to risk the dark.
I think there's a lot of satisfying aspects about working with Steven. I think he is willing to try anything. He is utterly unafraid. And so even though he has a more humanist point of view, he's willing to go very dark. He's to insert humor when you least expect it. Very early on, when we were both trying to figure out what the movie would feel like, we watched The French Connection together. And I remember thinking, let's do this as The French Connection, 50 years from now. Let's try and do it that way. Let's write it like that. Let's see if we can't approach it that way. And in fact, the one thing Steven did say to me that was very helpful when I started writing the script is, don't worry about the science fiction, futuristic. If someone gets on the phone, just have them get on the phone. And you don't get that in a lot of science fiction.
I think Philip K. Dick would be pleasantly surprised to discover how highly regarded he is now. He knew it was good, and he knew what he was trying to achieve, but I don't know that he felt that he had accomplished what he wanted to achieve. He wanted to go on and write more books. He was always planning something new.
I think he would be astounded, really, by the level of interest and academic writings and growing fan base, and the number of film adaptations.